Can the end of Season 3 Mark win every fight he's lost so far? Mark has been in a lot of fights since the first season, and unfortunately, he lost most of them miserably. But with Conquest now temporarily defeated, has Mark found his stride? It begs the question. At his current power level, would Mark have lost so many of those fights? Today, that's exactly what we are going to figure out. Starting out all the way back in the first season with the first encounter of the Flaxons. Mark starts the fight out with the eagerness, but is quickly overwhelmed. He struggles with his coordination and gets blasted, thrown, and beaten multiple times. If not for the other heroes helping him out of tight spots, he might have been injured more severely. Mark even gets grabbed and shocked by the Flaxons at one point. On top of all of that, he struggles to save even a single person who is seriously injured. The only reason the Flaxons retreat is due to their rapid aging and not any efforts made by Mark or the team at large. So, could Season 3 Mark have fared better? Absolutely yes is the answer. Mark is not only much stronger in Season 3, but also much wiser, having more battle experience and being a bit older and in control of his abilities. While the Flaxons were a bit of a challenge for Season 1 Mark, Season 3 Mark might have barely struggled at all against them. Later in the same episode, Mark comes up against the Flaxons again, and while he fares a bit better this time, even going into a bit of a frenzy, he would have still lost in the end. The Flaxons are better coordinated, seem to have more tech, and are just better equipped to handle Earth's heroes at a time. Until Omni-Man intervenes, that is. They still would have posed a little challenge to Season 3 Mark, but it's still worth mentioning he also technically lost this fight. However, he doesn't lose the next fight on any technical grounds. No, in this fight, he loses badly. This is a bit later in the season, and the first time we see Mark come against a foe who is way stronger than he is. At first, it's just Mark and Titan versus some Machine Head's goons, and the fight isn't going too badly for Mark. He loses his cool and actually dispatches several of the villains at once. That is before the Battle Beast intervenes. The Guardians are even there providing support just to really show how bad this loss really is. The other villains are a background set piece compared to the main showdown of Battle Beast versus all of them. Not only does Battle Beast manhandle half of the Guardians, but he also singles out Mark, punching him into walls and ceilings and smashes his ribs with that brutal maul, and eventually beats him unconscious nearly to death, spitting on him in disgust at just how weak he is. Mark is hospitalized for days and requires intensive care to survive. The only reason he was still alive was that Battle Beast got bored and decided to leave. So, could Season 3 Mark have won this fight? Short answer, no. Absolutely not. Mark may have been able to mop up the low-level goons with ease, but the Battle Beast would most likely still brutalize him, maybe even deciding to finish the job. While Mark is now a lot stronger than he was before, he is still only a candle compared to a bonfire when it comes to Battle Beast. He would have fared a lot better, maybe even getting some decent shots in. The battle would have definitely been carried out across the city, but we know from the source material that Battle Beast is on a whole other level beyond that of even Conquest. No matter the collateral, the fight would still have ended the same way. Except Battle Beast might have had a little bit more interest in the fight and likely would have finished the job. Let's move on to a bit more of an evenly matched battle. Towards the end of the season, as shocking revelations develop, we see Cecil unleash a massive kaiju to stop Omni-Man from finding Mark. This would have worked had Mark not found his dad anyway. Mark tries to intervene, not yet knowing the terrible truth. He tries to save his father. Starting the fight out very strong, he hits the enhanced kaiju so hard that a giant tooth comes flying out of its head, landing hundreds of feet away. But that's about the only good shot he gets in for the entire fight. He works with his father to bring the beast down, but as soon as Omni-Man is distracted by the Immortal, things go south for Mark pretty quickly. Struggling to even stay alive during this encounter, it's only due to Nolan's repeated interventions whenever he gets a chance that Mark is able to come out on top. Had Omni not been there, it would have likely been the end of Mark. So would Mark have fared better at his current level? I believe Mark would have beaten the creature, but not without a fight. This beast still caused quite the issue for Omni-Man himself, so I have my doubts as to how well the current Mark would cope. But given that once Omni-Man has regained his footing and is able to focus entirely on the creature, the fight is over pretty quickly. It can't have been too much of a match. Mark would have likely come through, but again, it would have been a bit more drawn out. He would have had to have been careful and placed his shots with strategy, or he might still be overwhelmed in the end. That brings us directly to the next fight, which Mark loses without a doubt. The biggest fight of the season, Omni-Man versus Mark. The moment of truth arrives and Mark is not ready in any sense. The fight starts out pretty fast and Omni-Man goes for shock and awe tactics against Mark, trying to show him that he doesn't stand a chance and that the humans he so desperately fights for are nothing more than vermin to the Viltrum Empire. But that doesn't work. Mark still decides to stand directly against his dad and try to defend the people of Earth. Nolan puts him in his place brutally, smashing him through the city of Chicago, killing thousands and collapsing buildings in his wake. But the most iconic moment of season 1 comes when Nolan pushes Mark through a speeding passenger train, killing almost everyone in it, using Mark as the tool of their demise. The broken but not beaten Mark is still trying desperately to appeal to his dad. Nolan ignores him and loses it at this point, slamming Mark into a mountain and punching him so hard that the entire thing cracks like an egg. He gives a long monologue too, before beating Mark bloody and flying off. Mark is broken both physically and mentally, but he is alive. The only reason he is alive is because Nolan chose to leave him that way. So, how would season 3 Mark have gone? Better, but not by much. That may be a hot take, seeing as Mark brought down Conquest, but let's not forget Conquest was a rabid dog let off the leash to have fun and toy with his food. Nolan was an elite and refined conqueror whose greatest strength was strategy and subterfuge. In the fight, he tried to break the Mark emotionally before losing it and breaking him physically. He tried to win the fight by showing Mark it was pointless to fight him. Before, he just indulged his son and won almost instantly. Conquest showed no such strategy. He just wanted to play. Also, Mark had a ton of help in that fight. In his fight against Nolan, he was completely alone. So Mark may have been able to take a few more hits, might have lasted a bit longer, maybe he would have even given his old man a run for his money for a while. But Nolan would have outthought Mark at every turn, with hundreds of years more experience than his son, multiple planets under his belt. It's just still a fight that Mark is not ready to win yet. The first season, Mark has a few huge losses, and even the current day Mark might not have been able to shift the tide. So how does he fare in season 2? Season 2 ramps up the wins and the losses. There's a lot to get into, so let's get started. Towards the end of episode 1, Mark comes face to face with one of the biggest villains yet, and he is completely unaware just how far it will go in the end. Angstrom Levy at this point still wants to do good. He's built a large machine to combine the knowledge of himself from multiple universes in order to help him build a utopia. But that's all about to go horribly wrong. Mark intervenes and doesn't quite know what the ominous machine will do, but he does see the Mauler clones and suspects it can't be good. He starts the fight out pretty well. It's clear he will win easily, that is, until Angstrom drops multiple variations of the Maulers in from multiple universes. Mark holds his ground quite well for a few moments, fighting multiple enemies at once and keeping them back, but eventually they overwhelm him. The beating he gets is brutal enough that Angstrom, in what might be his last act of mercy, tries to shut down the machine, which explodes in spectacular fashion.
Stop him, but don't kill him! No, I won't build my utopia with blood! Stop! There's too much power!
The only reason Mark barely walks away from this fight is that Angstrom ironically tried to help him. Season 3 Mark is measurably stronger than he was at the start of Season 2. No doubt, the Maulers wouldn't have stood a chance. He would have brought them down much faster and likely wouldn't have become overwhelmed if he made sure they stayed down long enough for him to tackle the next one. But he likely would not have been able to stop the machine without it exploding. So we can call this one a draw. The next one won't be for sure. On planet Thraxa, after Mark reunites with his father, the worst possible thing that could happen does. A Viltrumite scouting party finds them and descends on the planet. Mark is hopelessly, hilariously outclassed here. There's not just one Viltrumite he's up against here. It's 3 adult Viltrumites. Most of the fight, Mark is barely able to stay alive thanks to his father's help. Nolan has to constantly intervene, or Mark would have been brutally killed multiple times. That is, until he loses his cool and is able to provide a little challenge for the lady Viltrumite he comes up against. Showing just how far Mark has come in just a little bit of time, he actually seems to win the fight, but he is unable to finish the job, allowing her to get one last blow, stabbing him straight in the torso. Once again, Nolan is forced to intervene. Just a second later, and Mark would have lost the fight and his life. Thanks to a sneak attack from the last surviving Viltrumite, even Nolan loses his fight.
Mark, are you okay?
No.
Don't worry, it's over. Let me have a look.
Dad!
Next time kill somebody, make sure they're dead.
A shocking loss from the father-son duo. But if the current Mark had been there, it likely would have been a different outcome altogether. Not only has Season 3 Mark fought more than a few Viltrumites, he's lost a lot of his reluctance to kill if he has to. While those 3 Viltrumite warriors were a terrifying prospect to Season 2 Mark, they were no match for Omni-Man, and they were definitely not Conquest. Mark likely would have won the fight with ease considering he almost won back in Season 2. It was just his naive mercy that allowed the Viltrumite to get a fatal blow in. A mistake he definitely wouldn't let happen twice. race. Towards the end of the season, he comes up against another Viltrumite, Anissa. Unlike the previous Viltrumite scouting party, Anissa is an elite member of the warrior race. Sent as an unofficial diplomat, she attempts to reason with Mark at first, tries to appeal to his sense of bettering the human race. But Mark sees through the lies and the diplomacy. Anissa is so blindedly fast that she punches Mark into the atmosphere and seems to almost teleport behind him before smashing him back down to the earth full force. They tussle a bit and Mark lands a few shots. They don't do anything, but he does land them. All of this seemed to be Anissa just playing around because the moment she gets serious, all Mark can do is flail around trying not to die. The fight is over in seconds and Mark is left barely conscious in a crater. It's a hard watch for sure, but how would seasoned Mark cope in this situation? A lot better for sure, but I don't think he would win. While he's come up against an even stronger Viltrumite and won, he had help. Lots of it. In this situation, he's completely alone. Not only that, the reason he did so well against Conquest is because Conquest led him. He wanted to enjoy the fight, take his time and have his sick version of fun. Anissa subscribes to no such ideals. She is cold, calculating and efficient, and with her speed, that is said to be faster even than Omni-Man. She would likely still outclass even Season 3 Mark. We aren't sure how old she is, but she has more battle experience, greater control of her powers, she's faster and more brutal, and unlike Conquest, doesn't have any sick notion of letting herself be hit for fun. She would try to end the battle before it even began. An honorable mention to cap off the end of Season 2 is a technical, the return of Angstrom Levy. While Mark is hopelessly outmatched most of this fight, Angstrom is just a guy in reality. No super strength, no flight, no speed, just a man who can make portals. He spends most of the fight pushing Mark through multiple dimensions, tiring him out and just toying with him. But Mark does get the better of him and tricks him into a portal into what seems to be a desolate dimension. Mark does win the fight, although only technically Angstrom lives and he is trapped in a desolate dimension. If it weren't for a future variation of the Guardians of the Globe, he would have been trapped there forever and thus also he would have lost. So that begs the question, how would he fare later on in the series? Well, good news because we have the in-show answer to that. He wins pretty easily. Not only does Mark win, but he wins against an enhanced, tougher Angstrom. Fully equipped with drones and now able to fly thanks to technology, Mark is able to dodge and weave away from portals and brute force his way out of being just pushed into them. He beats Angstrom here fair and square, no trickery or technicalities, just a straight up win, although Angstrom does escape in the end. Coming now to Season 3, there aren't going to be any huge changes in the way a lot of these fights work out, but towards the end of the season, Mark makes a vow to Oliver that he will have far less mercy for the villains that pose a threat to his family, so a few of these battles might just nudge into Mark's favor. First up, surprisingly enough, it's Doc Seismic. That's right, not only does Doc Seismic beat Mark, he also captures most of the world's superhero teams and traps them in a super hard substance. Mark and Eve arrive underground to see all of their teammates already captured and are forced to fight Doc Seismic's new army. They do pretty well at first, until one of the giant centipedes manages to poison the Mark. Now easy prey, they are both captured as well. It's thanks to Darkwing and several pods of Reanimin that the day is won. They bring down Seismic and free the heroes. But Mark would have won this out of a technicality. See, Eve was about to free him. He may have been able to buy her enough time to free a few more heroes to gain the upper hand. But Seismic was also about to collapse the cave and crush most of them. So it all comes down to who would have survived long enough to be freed and how fast Mark would have been able to go from defense to offense. We also see that as soon as Seismic was out of the picture, the creatures went almost completely docile. Had Mark targeted Doc Seismic from the get-go and simply ripped him out of there, the creatures would have lost interest and they would have won straight away. Maybe that vow he takes at the end of the season would have made the difference here. That takes us straight into the next fight. Mark versus Cecil, confronting Cecil about the use of the Reanimin and the criminal Darkwing. Cecil, in a bit of desperation, attempts to show Mark that he is not playing around. Taking him to the dark room, he shows off the refinement and new Viltrumite nullification frequency. Mark might have been able to handle the Reanimin, but thanks to the frequency, he is dropped like a sack of potatoes. It's all Mark can do to escape the fight, which he only manages thanks to Cecil halting the frequency for a moment to talk.
Protection from what? Protection from me?
It's my job to defend the planet from threats. Don't make me put you in that category, Mark.
You think you can shut me up? Is that all you got?
Why did you have to ask that, kid? Remember that giant lobster you tangled with in Atlantis? I had the lab boys recreate the sound it made. So be reasonable, Mark.
Mark is able to get to the Guardians and convinces them to remove the transmitter located deep within his ear canal. Thanks to that one piece of crucial detail, the end of the season, Mark would win this fight. We again have more to show evidence that this is the case. While Cecil can play the frequency over loudspeakers, it's not nearly as effective. We see Mark later in the season burst into the White House to confront Cecil again. This time he only needs to cover one ear as he easily dispatches Reaniman one-handed. If Mark weren't called away, who knows how this would have ended for Cecil. Later into the season, we get yet another technicality thanks to the vow we mentioned earlier. Mark once again comes face to face with the Maulers. They have an upgraded weapon that allows him to stun the Guardians, and it even almost works on Mark. Oliver intervenes and Mark is forced to choose between stopping the Maulers or stopping a nuke. Here's why we know Mark will win at the end of the season. Oliver, all on his own, kills the Maulers rather quickly at that. If Mark were alone, it might have taken him a lot longer or he might have lost. But at the end of the season, if Mark is true to his word, he would have put the Maulers down in a similarly brutal fashion. Finally, up to the very last fight in the entire show so far that Mark loses on a technicality. His fight against the two variants of himself. Mark and Eve come across Omnivincible and Maskvincible about halfway through the episode. While they seem to be evenly matched throughout the fight, Mark has one outstanding weakness. Eve. She does a bit to contribute, but is ultimately unable to keep up with the variants and they begin to target her. One of the variants actually spell it out for us. If Mark didn't have to defend Eve, he might have been able to take them on. That vow from the end of the season once again comes into play here. Mark might have forced Eve to leave or gone straight for the kill against the variant he was fighting in order to help Eve with the one she was fighting. It's an interesting question, but one that has ultimately come to an end because Mark wins the remainder of his fights for the season, if only barely. And that's it for the list. Did we miss any fights? Were there any fights we mentioned that you think he could now win? Comment down below, and if you want to know everyone who can take down Omni-Man, then watch the video on screen now.